From the lofty height of the seer's eye, the distant horizon already held the promise of dawn. The sky in the east was marginally lighter than the inky blackness of the rest of the world. The mashals and lanterns of Avodhya lay far below the 1,008-foot stone tower, illuminating the city in pockets. Beyond its walls, crow-black darkness claimed the land. Seen thus at this hour of Ghor Suba, it was possible to understand why the Aryas of the Satya Yuga had chosen this location. Bounded by the river on one side, straddling it, in fact, with the rugged mountain ranges at its back, the foothills of the Himalayas, and facing the wild jungles of the southwoods that had long marked the great patch of central Aranya wilderness dividing the southern Arya nations from the northern ones, the city was ideally situated for defense. Beyond that great southern sprawl of tumultuous forest wilderness, the great and splendid tribes of the southern part of the subcontinent flourished in no lesser grandeur than Ayodhya. But that central forest had long marked a natural border in the spread of Arya civilization, a boundary not of mortal making but of nature herself. And nestled within its sprawling larges, many minor kingdoms had grown and flourished independently. Some, like the Gangetic fisher tribe, the Nisadas under Guha, were friendly to Ayodhyans and Aryas. Others were openly hostile. Seen from this height, it was like viewing an ocean of darkness untouched by the Masha Arya knowledge and Vedic wisdom. The southeast side of the circular promontory. The wind-up here was Lou wanton for mashals. The PFs accompanying the royal entourage had carried lanterns. They extinguished them now at Rama's command. Extinguish the lights, Rana commanded as he took up a position. Bharat looked around as the light faded from the last of these, marveling at the sheer number assembled here. There were no less than 30 people on the main promontory, with a few at the back where he stood. By the half-platform at the head of the winding stairs Tha afforded climbers a space to catch their breath. He had never seen so many here together at one time before. Why was it necessary to bring the entire war council, the councillors, the advisor, their mandatory PR guards, and even the queens Sumitra and Kausalya? Whatever Rama intended to show them, it must be quite extraordinary to require their presence. He had hoped to have a moment alone with Rama to speak in private and discuss matters in a more brotherly fashion, rather than the absurd formality of the hearing, if it could be called that, to which they had just been subjected back in the Sabha hall. But that seemed unlikely now. Bharat wistfully recalled coming up here with his brothers in happier days of yore, with Rama as well, though what a different Rama he had been back then. He remembered this one thing they had all loved to do, even though it was expressly forbidden to them. They would each take turns standing in the center of the promontory, arms held out, head flung back, then turning round and round as fast as they could manage, pinwheeling, until the pillars bounding the chamber seemed to vanish, leaving one with the illusion of a completely clear view all around. It had been remarkable and more than a little frightening at that age. And once, when he had lost his balance and gone rolling across the stone floor, it had been Rama who had caught him, just a yard short of the unbounded edge. He had clasped his brother's shoulders and hugged him warmly. And Rama had hugged him back. Now he remembered those days with sadness and regret. What had changed? Why had it changed? Why did it have to change at all? He would give anything to have those days, that brotherly love, that sense of utter closeness and completeness, back again, if only for a day, an hour, a moment. As the last light of the last lantern faded out slowly, and Bharat saw the faces of those nearest to him fade into obscurity, he realized why Rama had asked for the lights to be extinguished. The answer came in the form of a collective intake of breath from those standing at the fore, looking out between the pillars that were the only thing between themselves and the darkness beyond the tower. Due to the prescient design of the tower, every one of those gathered here on the promontory was afforded a view of the lands that lay beyond the Saryu Valley. Despite the thick forestation of those parts, it was possible to see what Rama had brought them here to witness. Visible between the gaps in the trees, and in front of the tree line, their fur contrasting sufficiently with the verdant flora to make them stand out, was an army of Vanars so immense that Bharat had no words to describe it. Mammoth? Huge? Enormous? All these seemed weak choices to describe the sheer profusion that carpeted the land to the east of Ayodhya, stretching for yojanas in that direction. A moving, stirring sea of Vanars, therefore rippling like grass on an open plain. Bharat felt his own breath catch in his throat. There must be lakhs of the creatures. A crore even. 2 crore? Possibly. A small shape hovered above the gathered Vanar armies, floating in midair. Even without the silhouette of that familiar leonine head and the bushy-tipped enormously long tail curled upwards, Bharat could not have mistaken Hanuman. As he watched, the Vanar expanded himself in size until he grew large and tall enough for his feet to touch the ground. A hummock of earth dissolved beneath his heel, crumbling to dust, and his head stood at the same height as the seer's eye itself. He put his palms together and bowed towards the tower, towards Rama, speaking in a great rumbling tone that reached the gathering on the promontory like a great wind redolent of Vanar fur and sweat. By my grace, Lord Rama, I present to you the Vanar armies assembled and awaiting your command. Rama raised his hand which, Bharat noted, now held the gleaming Rajtharu of the Suryavanshi Ikshwaku dynasty. Thank you, my loyal friend. Once again, you have lived up to your word and done me a great service. Hanuman bowed deeply, shrinking as he did so. In another moment he had resumed his normal size and flew back towards the Vanar ranks, descending to ground level before them. Several excited voices began to speak in the gathering. Rama cut them all off by turning and raising his hand again, the royal scepter commanding instant obedience. If we shall all turn to look north and west now, we shall see what Lakshman has to show us as well. The gathering turned at once in the direction specified. Bharat turned with them, his eyes meeting Shatrughan's as his brother turned too. He saw the simulacrum of his own astonishment reflected in Shatrughan's eyes. What is Rama up to? What does he intend to do with a Vanar army of that magnitude? Invade Lanka again? Surely not. There was nothing in Lanka worth taking, he knew. Which meant Rama had other territories in mind. But which ones? And why? Ayodhya had no more natural enemies left, now that Ravana and his great Asur and Rakshas hordes were gone. Yet he would not have called for Hanuman to assemble the Vanar multitudes just for a parade. Then he saw what lay to the northwest and all thought, all logic drained from his mind. When the gathering gasped collectively this time, he opened his mouth as well. Although no sound emerged, he felt no less stunned. On the northwestern plains above Ayodhya, cleared generations ago to accommodate the city-state's great standing army and provide space for its military maneuvers and training, there now stood a force of mortal soldiers on foot, on chariot, on horseback, and on elephant-back. It was the army of Ayodhya, but Bharat knew the size and extent of Ayodhyan forces. This assemblage far exceeded their normal standing numbers. Where Ayodhya's regular standing army had perhaps 4 Akshuhinis or battalions, this force was far, far greater in size. His practiced eye scanned the neat rectangular formations arrayed out in impressive order on the practice plains and beyond. The dawn was just breaking, and as the assembly on the promontory gazed out at this astonishing spectacle, spreading tentacles of light crept across the landscape, catching and reflecting off the gleaming polished armor and weaponry of the assembled ranks. Bharat estimated that no less than 6 Akshuhinis were assembled, perhaps even 7 or 8 if those shadows at the mouth of Ikshwaku's canyon were also soldiers. 8 Akshuhinis? it was staggering. Twice the size of Ayodhya's army. And this was in addition to the Vanar hordes. Rama said, "Behold, the greatest army ever raised in the history of the world. A force of mortals and Vanars together comprising greater numbers than all the other armies of the Arya nations combined. With this great force we shall perform the Ashwamedha Yajna and go forth today to challenge all the nations of the known world." And he raised the Rajtaru, catching the slanting first light of day and setting it aglow. "Ayodhya Anasha," he cried. 36 voices answered him from the promontory, "Ayodhya Anasha." And from the Vanar hordes behind them and the mortal army before them, a great and terrible cry resounded, filling the world with a rumbling no less than thunder. "Ayodhya Anasha."